But look, let's start with, there's this New York Times piece that everyone has been reading today where it's analysed our bushfire season. Jason, I want to start with you. Yep. Look, it says that Australia will never be the same again, that we're going through anxiety and trauma. What do you think? Is this gross exaggeration?
Yeah, I think it is gross exaggeration. The New York Times coverage of the bushfire season has been, frankly, irresponsible from woe to go. There is no doubt that the climate change, which is the point it's trying to make, was a major contributor to the size and length of the bushfire season that we had. No one's disputing that. But the manner and form in which they've presented it to an international audience is both regrettable and misleading.
Sarah, what do you think about this?
Well, look, I've spent quite a bit of time out in a number of the fire-affected communities. Blue Mountains, here in the Adelaide Hills, Kangaroo Island, and of course my own old home, my family property, was ravaged by fire. So I guess I've seen firsthand the level of anxiety and fear from people. But I also am concerned about the element of the rest of the communities that haven't necessarily been affected by fire, but perhaps have been living through weeks of that hazardous smoke, or indeed for some communities who are now worried about their water supply, because in some of those rural and regional areas, even though the fires are out, the rain came, and now we've got toxic waterways. So I don't think we can just dismiss that this is not worrying people. It clearly is. And when you see photographs and footage of children with face masks on, you know, you've got to, you know that the community is worried. And look, I saw the coverage of the, you know, throughout this period globally, the rest of the world looking on in horror to what was going on here. And I don't think we want to just dismiss that as, oh, well, this is all a bit hyping it up. You know, with that concern came millions and millions of dollars in donation, offers of help, and of course people saying, well, what are we going to do as a globe, as a global community, to get serious about climate change?
Look, I've got to say that you know, we don't rely on a cultural cringe in the Australian government to worry about what other people are saying about us to know that we need to act on these things. And just because people gave us millions of dollars doesn't mean that charity comes with strings attached. When Australians have donated tens of millions of dollars to disasters overseas, we haven't attached strings to that. And I suspect that when people have given us money, it's been the same way around. All of us watched on in horror as these things occurred. But it is wrong to suggest that waterways are now toxified. It is wrong to suggest and to perpetuate the fear and angst that people may have felt during the bushfire season on, as the New York Times is doing, simply to sell more newspapers. It's just wrong.
Australia will never be the same again.
I don't think you can say it's wrong that rivers and streams are becoming polluted and contaminated. That's basic fact. That's what's going on. How we respond to this and how we restore the environment, how we look after communities, how we make not just them be able to be resilient into the future, but how they rebuild now. I mean, you can't just say just because the rains have come, some of the fires are out and it's a-okay. It's not.
Well, just to move on from this, I think there is also a concern that, you know, it's not just cultural cringe, but the more this story is perpetuated overseas, that Australia will never be the same again. There's a concern that you know, people won't come here and visit and that our economy will suffer even further. But Jason, I actually want to ask you about these comments by your colleague Trent Zimmerman that we should move towards a net zero emissions target by 2050. Is this something that you're pushing for?
Well, look, the thing that I'm really pushing for is a roadmap so that Australians of all shapes and sizes and colours, roadmap to 2050, how you get to net zero, whatever our emissions are in 2050, how do we get there, what the costs and benefits of doing that are.
But are you aiming to get to net zero?
Look, I'd like to get to net zero before that if we can. The question is, what are the costs and what are the plans that you need to have in place to do that? Now, if you speak to people like Mike Cannon-Brookes, he will say to you that technology is developing so quickly that 2050 isn't ambitious enough. If you talk to people like Matt Canavan, he will say to you, if you just look at the sheer facts and numbers on the table, 2050 is looking very, very difficult. I think he used a different word than that. But look, what is important, fantastical, is it's almost like...
Is this something that you
Whatever
and
the hell
other moderate
fantastical
Liberals
means.
are moving towards?
Sorry,
Is this something that you and moderate Liberals will take up with the Prime Minister?
Well, I think modern Liberals are arguing within the party
Did you
that
change moderate to moderate?
Indeed, I did.
Right.
I picked up on that.
But is this something you are going to take to the Prime Minister?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I don't think it should just be one group of Liberal MPs. I think every member of Parliament should be saying we need to have plans in place. We need to put them down on paper so the community...
To get to net zero emissions by 2050.
If that is... Well, we're committed to the Paris Agreement, which says that we need to get to net zero in the second half of this century. So that's the thing that the government is definitely committed to. And as I say, we'd like to get there sooner.
Sarah, what's your target?
Well, look, we know, of course, that we have to listen to what the science is saying, and the scientists are saying the Paris target of keeping temperatures below 2 degrees is going to take a lot of effort. We need to be putting that effort in now. But we're worried, of course, that even 2 degrees is still going to make things very tough. And we've already had temperature rise of 1 degree, and look what happened this summer here in Australia. And we've just talked about that a little bit. And
Sarah, we're just running out of time, and I do want to ask you about, you say you're going to refer another 2 government programs to the Auditor-General for pork barrelling, off the back of the one that Bridget McKenzie's already resigned over. You know, if the Auditor-General agrees to look at these 2 other programs, you know, do you think this could be a really serious issue for the government?
Well, this is in relation to these environmental grants, so very similar type of activity, pork barrelling at its worst and its most blatant. I'll leave it to the Auditor-General to get to the bottom of it. I think that's only right for that independent body to have a look. But what this shows is just how the pork barrelling and the blatantness that this government tried to buy votes and win the election with taxpayers' money. Now, we know the Nationals, this has caused huge problems for the Nationals. The resignation of Bridget McKenzie has now created warfare within the National Party. I just watched your program and saw, you know, Michael McCormack on there attacking Trent Zimmerman. And I mean, it's gone from a problem for the National Party to a problem for the Prime Minister, and it is now open warfare across the board in the government. And Jason, I don't know how you're going to handle it, mate, but it seems as though some of those people really need to be pulled into line.
This is going to be a big problem, Jason, if the reports find pork barrelling and another couple of $100 million programs, this is going to be a serious issue for the government.
Well, look,
and more resignations.
Sure. Look, it is regrettable that we refer to programs that are supporting community groups, in this case, environmental groups, and obviously sporting groups as pork barrelling. What we do know from the ANAO report is that prior to Bridget McKenzie's, from the Gagens report, is prior to Bridget McKenzie's involvement, there were 30 electorates without any grants. At the end of it, there were 4. You know, if Sarah is
now the revelation that 43% of the projects
but this is why
are not eligible.
Absolutely, Sharri, and this is why we have elected officials making these decisions and not unelected public servants, because most of the ineligibility was because it arrived in the post the day after the closing of nominations or the closing of applications. So we would have denied perfectly legitimate community sporting grants to people who need and wanted them because they missed an arbitrary date. That's why we let elected officials make these decisions and not bureaucrats.
Unfortunately,
the problem we've got here
actually
is the lack of trust. That's what it is. People just don't trust that you guys do the right thing. That's the problem. That's what we're going to clean up.